A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim. Bismillahir rahmanir rahim. Assalamu alaikum and good evening. Welcome to On the Couch with me, Farida, Rabia, and Soki and Zinze. This is where you hear the difference on 100.4 FM. On the Couch, together in Lately in Land and Housing is your weekly show that discusses current affairs in political landscape pertaining to housing, evictions, equitable access to land, and tenure security. Today, we will uncover Upgrading Informal Settlements Program and alternative building Sandbags. Now, in studio, we have Adi Kumar, who is the Executive Director at Difuno Kwazi, and Barry White, who is founder of Ubushle Baka or Bushle. Good evening, gentlemen. Welcome to On the Couch.
Thanks for having us.
So now the past shows have been interesting. We spoke about different forms of housing, dispositions, and the laws that were enacted to readdress these vicious cycles. Today we look at the concept of informal settlement upgrading and other alternative building technologies that the government and public sector should consider. Now our lines are open 0786 10 11 12 or 021 699 1786 for all your questions and comments. But now let's start with why there was a need for the upgrading of informal settlement program when 1/5 of all Cape Town's households live in informal settlements, and there are more than 360,000 households registered on the city's housing waiting list. Also bearing in mind that there is a shortage of housing for households that earn less than 22,000 per month. So your thoughts, Mr. Adi?
Sure. So maybe it's important to put some of this in a bit of a historical context, because when the housing program was introduced in 1994 and subsequently, the idea was that people who had been historically dispossessed of property and did not have adequate housing would be housed through the RDP program. In 2004, there was a significant shift in policy which brought in the Breaking New Ground policy, which looked much more at not just housing, but started to look a little bit more at what neighborhoods could feel like. So how do you link in social amenities, education facilities, health facilities into a much more integrated neighborhood, so to say. And that's where this idea of addressing informal settlements emerged. So the first kind of informal settlement upgrading projects were introduced particularly in Cape Town, which was one of the first ones to apply for upgrading of informal settlements starting in 2009. But this figure is contrasted by the fact that there has been an exponential growth of informal settlements in the country over the last 30 years. So in 1994, there were probably about 300 informal settlements at that time. Today, the latest figures that I checked today was about 3,600. So now this raises some very important fundamental questions, like if you're delivering 4 million houses in the last 30 years, then why is it that you're seeing 3,500 informal settlements? Why are the informal settlements growing while so much housing delivery is happening? So a lot of the program, the upgrading of informal settlement program, is essentially geared to addressing the informal settlements as they exist. And that's really the intent of the program.
Do you have an answer to that? Why?
Well, there are multiple reasons for that. Partly the reasons are with the amount of growth that urban areas are seeking. So our urban centers, so all our metros, for instance, your Johannesburg, Cape Town, and so on, contribute about 80% to the economy, and that's where people are moving to. So a lot of the large cities are drawing in people into these places, but there isn't enough adequate housing for people to live in. So most people end up occupying land, and as a result get into informal settlements. The other is that many of these cities, the property markets are unaffordable. So often people who historically, for instance, have lived in Woodstock, Salt River, get evicted from there and end up going into informal settlements because they cannot afford to stay in the inner city, for instance. So it's a combination of things. Partly it has to do with private property, others it has to do with people coming into cities. And I don't think it's just a metro phenomenon. I think a lot of the smaller cities like Stellenbosch, George and others are also experiencing very high numbers of people moving into informal settlements for precisely the same reasons.
That's about 67% of all households in Cape Town. Are we expecting that there is going to be an increase on this number?
I think there's going to be a substantial increase in the next 10 to 15 years. And I think the city has expressed this as a huge concern, how to manage its housing crisis, because as you said, like there's such a big waiting list already of people who are waiting for housing, but then there's going to be another million people or so that might get added into the Cape Town's demography. And how is the city going to address some of these backlogs and the incoming people who are coming into the city?
So, Mr. Adi, with someone in your position with all this information, and you say that the city is trying to manage this crisis, and I feel that we continue to manage this crisis. I don't know if manage means that more people just go into the informal settlements because they can't afford where they are staying, or like I don't understand the management. So an organization like Difunokwazi or Buhle Baka, what is it that you guys tend to do with this information and sort of help people? It's one thing to understand.
Sure.
It's another thing to get out of that reality.
So I mean, so I can speak more generally outside of Ndifuno-Kwasi. There's been lots of efforts put by different organizations, and Barry can speak to some of these. Lots of initiatives by different organizations to demonstrate how upgrading of informal settlements can take place. And just to say that all of this work needs to happen within the national policy framework. And interestingly, our national policy framework is perhaps one of the, especially around informal settlement upgrading, is a very progressive policy framework. It's not prescriptive at all. It basically says we want to upgrade people in informal settlements where they live so that they have the best form of amenities, they feel secure, and that they have the type of opportunities. And interestingly, compared to what the RDP and the BNG program offers, the upgrading of informal settlements works across race, class, gender, nationality. So even if you're a migrant that is not a South African national, you can still benefit from a UISP or a upgrading of informal settlement project as long as you're living in that informal settlement. So in that sense, it's a very progressive way of thinking about how to address it. What has been happening is a number of different initiatives that look at a range of options from different types of service delivery. So looking at like how taps and toilets are delivered to informal settlements as better managed facilities. So for instance, wash facilities. Why can't you have hot showers in informal settlements, for instance? There are other initiatives like reblocking, which seek to reconfigure the informal settlements in a way that roads are opened up and trash can be collected, better services can be brought into it. And then there are a number of initiatives around top structure, which I'm sure Barry will speak to.
So what does this upgrading of informal settlements program do, and what does it look like practically?
Well, nobody knows what it looks like practically, just to say, sadly. So anecdotally, like about 7 or 8 years ago, there was a litigation case that was raised by the Social Justice Coalition around sanitation. And when this was brought up in one of the forums, one of the city officials stood up and said, actually, the court papers are wrong. It doesn't take us 11 years to upgrade an informal settlement. It takes us about 15 years to upgrade one informal settlement. Now, if you put that in the national context or in the Cape Town context, you're looking at maybe like at best like 2,000 years or something like that. Like the earth would be dead by the time we would get around to doing anything substantial with.
You never know.
Yeah.
I mean, there must be hope.
Yeah,
I suppose so.
Yeah.
But is there a way that we could do this faster?
So definitely, I think there are lots of pieces in the legislation which allow us to, and including in civil society, lots of instruments and ideas that have been generated that could really accelerate trying to resolve the issue of informal settlements. And they deal with very different things. I think the land question has to be resolved. So one of the big things that the policy and actually all global literature speaks about is about tenure security. Like, why should a person living in an informal settlement feel insecure from evictions, from any of the other aspects that affect people's safety and general sense of belonging to a place? So that is one of the fundamental foundations of the UISP. The second is public participation. You cannot work in an informal settlement that is very dense with lots of people living very close to each other without actually meaningfully engaging with them. And this has been done. I don't think we have a lack of examples in the country. It's just that they don't get picked up and replicated as quickly as you would like it to.
Yeah, there's a couple of factors. So when we were facilitating the UISP within a community called Sweet Home Farm, which is in Philippi, that process started. That was phase one. So that was roads, drainage, that sort of thing. That took the city talk about the fact that was their quickest project in terms of starting a project and getting a digger on site. Now, I think that there's two reasons for that. One, because there was the right leadership in community. So the policy in place, had the right engineering company, blah, blah, with the facilitation and all that sort of stuff. We had the right leader, non-politically affiliated, trusted by the community, trusted by actually the city. But also multiple engagements, going back to the community again, back again, even communicating bad news. Communicate the bad news, allow the humans on the ground to be part of the process. But even that, phase 1 took 5 years. So nothing happens quickly. But that was the quickest that essentially they've done it in terms of starting a process. You know, they have to apply for funding, blah, blah, and then getting on the ground and digging and bringing in the roads. So now at the moment there is now a road structure and shacks. So, you know, obviously, what's the next phase?
How long is phase 1 took 5 years. Where are we now in Philippi?
We wait.
Doesn't this just put us back into where we were before? So it's almost like starting, and I also feel like if we speak about this kind of program where we're supposed to uplift and upgrade and, you know, sort of provide these informal settlements with the resources that you would get in the CBD or in other areas, if they don't complete the job, isn't that them indirectly saying that we don't value your needs?
I don't know if that's entirely true.
Okay.
My honest held belief, which may not be shared with Adi, is people don't really know what they're doing. This is a huge thing. The indeterminacy of what I call the zinc forest is something which is always becoming. And so the city, if you think about their department, they're putting out fires and they're trying to develop. With how many people in the department?
Very few.
Like half a dozen people. So it's extraordinarily difficult. And I actually think it would be better if we acknowledge that actually the developmental nirvana of like in-situ upgrades of informal communities, how do we do it incrementally? How do we do it with community? Is an extraordinarily difficult thing to do. And actually we haven't seen it in its proper fruition. We haven't seen it manifest. So, but it's essential that we all do it together. It's essential that we might not know where we're going, but we have to go there together in partnership with community, with the city, with civil society.
0786 10 11 12 is the number you can send us a message on, or 021 699 1786. We are speaking to Adi Kumar, who is the Executive Director at Difunokwasi, and Barry Lewis, who is the founder of Ubuhle Baka Ubuhle. And we're speaking about the Upgrading Informal Settlements Program. That is a conversation we're having, but we don't have a picture for it. There's a starting point, but there's no finishing yet, and the time frame. I'm not too hopeful. Honestly, I'm not, because again, I just want to give the people something.
Yes. Yes.
I'm lucky. You guys might be lucky, but others who are listening aren't as lucky, or others who find themselves on a waiting list that they might not know when they will be called aren't lucky. So
I mean, maybe to give a slightly more positive spin to what we've been talking about. So there is no other way except upgrading informal settlements, to be honest, because and you'll see there is not even a recent, like probably like a 10-year shift that's been happening in the way everybody's talking about informal settlements. We realize that it is not going to be possible in our lifetime to remove every informal settlement from the face of this planet. the only way to do it is to do incremental work in informal settlements where people are living at the moment and create enough choice for things to happen. And I think there are signs that a lot of people in the public sector are coming to this realization, but there's also a realization in the civil society that this is the way it needs to be done. Now, this cannot be where I think our approach differs from like how public sector thinks. Public sectors always thinking is like project by project, one project, two project, we're going to finish 10 and then we're going to get to the next 10. That approach doesn't work. It actually has to be all of it all together all at once. And what that means is that you actually have to do something substantial in every informal settlement, and this does not necessarily need to start just with like the hard infrastructure service delivery. It actually needs to start with a conversation, with a dialogue, helping people, having the conversation. I've worked in processes in some of the informal settlements where municipal officials have come in and said, look, there is no way you're going to get a house, but we're here, we're going to work with you for the next 6 months, a year, 5 years to figure out what exactly your needs are, how we can improve the current living conditions and slowly get there. And we've seen some dramatic change in those places where, communities have one-to-one toilets, where roads have been built, even without it like necessarily falling within the exact parameters of the UISP.
There is a comment that came through. Assalamu alaikum. We have a situation in Cape Town where the DA are giving informal settlements free services like water and sanitation and electricity, while homeowners are being charged heavily for those services. Why are homeowners who are already struggling to pay the bills are made to subsidize services rendered to the informal settlements absolutely free?
So just to say, I don't have the latest figures for this caller. I think it's a great question to ask. But the kind of services that the city provides to informal settlements, like the communal services, the shared taps and toilets and so on, is literally a fraction. During the water crisis, it became very apparent that the kind of services that they provide to informal settlements is a very, very small fraction of the amount of water that the rest of the people who pay rates and taxes consume. So I do not think it's a fair comparison in terms of like what just the scale of water and other services that informal settlements use. But where possible, the city does provide, like, for instance, like electricity meters, and people living in informal settlements do pay for electricity and some of the other services that get associated with it. So I wouldn't say that it's actually completely unfair. And then secondly, a lot of the revenue that the city gets from its indigency grant actually comes from the fact that there are people who require that support. So it's not actually coming from individuals' rates and taxes. It's not coming from the rates and taxes that I might pay. It's actually coming from an indigency grant that comes directly from national to the city of Cape Town.
I don't know if that answers the listener's question or comment, but I think we have to go for a short break quickly. This is 100.4 FM on the couch. We're speaking about upgrading informal settlements, and the conversation continues right after this. Couch, where you hear the difference on 100.4 FM. We are together in Lately in Land and Housing, which is your weekly show that discusses current affairs in political landscape pertaining to housing, evictions, equitable access to land, and tenure security. Today we are uncovering Upgrading Informal Settlements Program and alternative buildings. And in studio we have Adi Kumar, Executive Director at Difuno Kwazi, and Barry Lewis, founder of Ubuhle Baka Ubuhle, speaking to us on this topic. Now, off air, Mr. Barry was telling me there is hope. But before we get into the hopeful part of this conversation, let's talk about the phases of Upgrading Informal Settlements Program and what that would look like, even though we don't have it yet.
Yeah, so I mean, many informal settlements across the country at different stages, but generally in the policy prescription there are 4 phases of the UISP. The first one generally deals with the basic fundamental process of engaging with people. That means if there's a community living in an informal settlement, you go and work with them, you develop some kind of an upgrading plan that speaks to how that community could look if it was redeveloped. Also starts to do a little bit of assessment around whether that particular land is developable. So as you know, many of the informal settlements might be in floodplains or under power lines or some of these things. So they look at the hazards, they look at all kinds of criteria that make sure that land, particularly specific land, is developable. So that's the first phase, which is really just kind of getting a sense whether this land can be developed and what the opportunities for development look like. The second phase is mostly about initiation, which means that like the money starts to flow, some of the interim services come into play, the upgrading plan is finalized, the engineering plans are starting to be worked on and finalized and all of those kind of things. And a big part of phase 2 is figuring out what kind of tenure system people will get to, which means will they have a title deed, will they have collective ownership, will they have some kind of other rights that the city might offer. The phase 3 is the implementation phase, and this is where individual services are provided to people. So each household would typically get like individual services, and then essentially some kind of subdivision would be there, which means that like, everybody would be in a small piece of land where they assume that their structure or their top structure would go up. Phase 4 is called a very strange name, but consolidation, but basically means that like that's where you get into the top structure, which is the house itself. And that is only for people that would qualify for a subsidy. So anybody who's South African earning under 3,500 rand. So for instance, if there's a foreign national who's living in an informal settlement, they would probably go up to phase 3, and then phase 4 would be where only South African nationals who would qualify for a housing subsidy would get that subsidy. So those are the 4 phases through which it goes. And if you look at the kind of like national reporting at the moment in front of Parliament and so on, their estimate between the 2019 to 2024 MTSF, they're trying to target about like 1,500 odd informal settlements across the country. And so each of these are at different phases of upgrading. Some are at phase 1, some are at phase 2, some are at phase 3, hypothetically. Yeah.
Barry's smiling at me. Do you want to share with the listeners what that smile is for?
No, not at all. No, it's big things. It's complex things. It's and we have an awful lot to learn. We can't honestly say that we have the answer, because I'm smiling because what Adi is saying is like when you read the policy, it's like it just seems so simple, but to get from one to another, it's like pulling teeth. It's like extraordinarily difficult.
Yeah, because I was going to ask about the time frame. So phase 1 to phase 4, is that like 15 years?
Yeah, I mean, if you were to really dig deep into like why does it take 15 years? Like why can't it be like 2 years to upgrade an informal settlement? You look at a procurement process, 120 days for a service provider. So for engineering services, for heritage, for town planning, all of these you require, 3 different sets of companies that would do that work. To get approvals, you required heritage approval, township establishment, town planning approval, environmental authorization. So in a way, what our planning system has done, and I think this is where the rubber hits the road, is that about 10 to 12 years ago, the planning system that would apply to Camps Bay would not apply to Khayelitsha, for instance. You had a different set of rules because you had an informal area which had very different ways things were done, and you had a formal area where you needed to get all those approvals for 2-3 years to renovate or whatever. The planning system has changed now. Now they say the same rules as Camps Bay would apply to Khayelitsha. Now compliance is very costly. If you want to do things in exactly the norms and standards of what is required and get all the approvals and do everything as per exact specs, it will take you a long time. And if you're trying to do it with like 30, 40, 50 informal settlements simultaneously, you require an entire organization that would just do upgrading of informal settlements. And that's actually what's needed. If you want to resolve this issue, you have to resolve how this dichotomy works. You cannot apply the system of Camps Bay in Khayelitsha or Mitchell's Plain. You just cannot. There has to be a different set of rules that apply there that allow it to happen much quicker. And government must step in and resolve this procurement lag, because I was involved in Kensington in an upgrading project. I kid you not, it was 18 months to deliver 18 toilets. It was cheaper to actually just say, like, the officials that are working on it, they don't get paid their salary for a month, and we would have accrued the entire amount of money for those 18 toilets. It took 18 months because they had to go through 3 procurement processes, because every time there was some kind of flaw, they had to cancel it, then they had to go to the term tender people, but the costs were too high. So it's just caught in unnecessary bureaucracy, which is not needed at this moment when the crisis is so dire.
Yeah, you said that when we're looking at informal settlements, you're also looking at if you can build on there or if you can't build on there. So when we look at a place that you can't build on, what is there that doesn't allow for that informal settlement to become something different?
So where you can develop, for instance, like there is no, well, you need to go through the whole process to get to upgrading. But if you can't develop, this is one of the things that the latest kind of evaluation of this program has said, that in most places the local authorities have just been sluggish too. So for instance, like take the UISP projects in Khayelitsha and Philippi. Now, if the city sells off a piece of land in Khayelitsha but then says Enkanini can't be upgraded because we don't have enough land to move the people off there, then that itself is a contradiction. So I think there has to be a bit more citywide perspective of how land works, because not a lot of the land, particularly in Cape Town, is easily developable. It requires work. But where it is available, where land is available, where it can be developed, you have to move fast and you have to get things done quickly. And I think that's where a lot of the lag is happening.
So 0786 10 11 12 for all your questions and comments. 021 699 1786. We are speaking about upgrading informal settlement program, and I would like to know is, do you think that this program is perpetuating spatial injustice? Because in some way, I'm still on the train where it's saying that you have to make do with what you have. I can't really offer you a house in the city. You also can't afford to rent a place in this area that's not so city-like, but, a moderate area for you to stay in. So the way I see it in my mind is that if we are upgrading informal settlements, we are creating more schools, better structures, better roads, for example. If we are looking at our corner shops, we are making that look better. If we're looking at our clinics, we want, maybe a bigger hospital in that particular area. We want a few more clinics. We also want to create employment within the area so that people don't have to travel outside of their community to get better opportunities. Is that the whole thing?
That's a lovely picture.
I know.
That's a prophetic picture that you paint, and I think we have to dance with that. I wouldn't honestly say that the UISP thinks totally holistically like that, because when I engage with planners who are designing spaces and things like that, so when we were doing the UISP in Sweet Home Farm, there came a point where you knew that in terms of the town plan that was going to be submitted, i.e. what Adi was saying in terms of that highly bureaucratic process, I knew that the planner was going to design all the houses.
Mm-hmm.
But it was like, hold on, how about you don't design it at the 6th floor in town, in your planning nice little suite? How about we plan it in community? How about we invite the humans in? How about we take a section, we draw the shacks, 1 to 100, we print it out, we get some wooden blocks, we engage with the parameters of change and all that sort of stuff, and say, well, what do you want? What do you want to see happen? Because in this city...
Or what do you need in your community?
Exactly. Ask the people who are the experts. We in Kalina, you are the expert.
Yeah.
So that's why we say we're not the experts, because like you said, we don't live there.
Yeah.
And so sometimes we need to shut up and listen and hear what wants to come, what wants to become. So if you look at the township like Silvertown in Khayelitsha, it was designed by an engineer, because it's straight roads, houses, roads, and the children are playing in the streets.
Mm.
So then you hear a planner, whose name I won't mention, but he has left the city of Cape Town, he's gone to another land, saying, Barry, I don't know why you're upset about these roads, because I've seen the children playing in the streets and they look like they're having fun.
Mm.
And I'm like, I know where you live, and I know your children live and play in the park or the garden.
Yeah.
Where are the play spaces? Where are the amenities? Where are the other things that require life to happen?
Mm.
And that's why I firmly believe that part of the hope story is listen to the community. Allow them to meaningfully come to the table and say, actually, this is what we want. And they came up with some inordinately beautiful ideas around defensible spaces, around at the centre of the square. They literally said, I think we need play at the centre.
Mm.
And without them knowing the developmental sort of policy around children playing, children want to be seen when they're played. So at the very centre of a square, they're seen. And it removed this whole perception around cars driving where they're playing. It's like, no, cars wouldn't go into the square because it's not efficient for their driving. So when we engaged with the community, they painted a different picture. And if I'm honest, what did they actually do? They created an urban version of a kraal.
Mm.
And so a lot of the things, if we're talking about indigenous practices and all this sort of stuff, I genuinely, honestly believe that a lot of the answers come in terms of meaningful city homemaking. We need to go back. We need to go back to, the normalities of like the Eastern Cape. How did you live?
Mm.
What is normal? And in the kraal, everything is connected. Spirituality, growing of plants and of vegetables, the animals, education, food, the ancestors. Everything is there. Everything is in the same space.
I feel that as though you are selling us dreams.
I wanted to paint a hopeful picture.
Yes, hopeful. But the reality is that even if we went to a traditional way of living before a people were oppressed, do the people now know that life before then? I don't know if I'm making sense. So you want to offer maybe a traditional way of living where we have community freedom and access and so on, but these people only know this.
No, there's a nuance here, and the nuance is this. I interpreted their response and their ideas as a version of a kraal.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't say, let's go back to traditional ways. The point is, what is it that you can see that you want? What are we missing from this development story? Because I knew that the planner was going to make decisions on your behalf. So rather, what is it that you want to see?
So with the information that you get with what is it that you want to see and you pass it on to the planner, then what happens?
He rejects it because he said, this isn't going to work. It's not dense enough, Barry. Because we drew the manifestation of what we heard. And then I said to him, I'm not going to say the name of the planner, but he's a lovely guy. But I said, how about you count the houses on the plan? And then he was shocked because actually it was 110 habitable rooms per hectare, which is a very appropriate peri-urban density. It looked like it was a bit rural. It was perfectly appropriate for this sort of density within the city.
Mm.
So part of me was like, I think we need to keep on going back to the community. Yes, we have to play a dance with the requirements of the city. Yes, there's an engineer involved, and the engineer is going to need certain things. But we have to bring the humans in.
So then so if he, at the end of the day, rejects it, how do we then work together?
Well, he didn't reject it after he counted the houses.
Okay. So there is a manifestation of this.
Can I just add something to this?
Yes.
I think a lot of the informal... maybe firstly to answer your specific question. So I don't think informal settlement upgrading is necessarily a sellout in that sense. It's not a situation like, guys, you're being given the raw deal whereas others are getting houses and things like that. I don't think that is the case. I think the ultimate aspiration of the informal settlement upgrading program is to work in tandem with other housing programs. So because land has a direct economic effect, where you live and how you're housed, what your nature of your housing has a direct impact on your kind of economic, ability to kind of like, raise resources and do whatever you need to do as a family. So I think if you put it in the context of other housing programs like social housing, actually it is a very profound program because it adds value. Now it does have downsides to it because a lot of our informal settlements are in the periphery, so it doesn't provide the same spatial justice lens that social housing would provide. And it's not to say that should be given preference over social housing. I think it's a question of how do we work both these systems together so that when people are at a stage of development are able to move to the inner city and so on. I think in terms of what is very different about this specific program, and I can see that it's very frustrating to understand why this isn't a clear program that can just be implemented. Part of the reason, and this is a global phenomena, is because a lot of this relies on healthy creative negotiation between the people living and between the authorities that work there. And a lot of the times this negotiation happens through organizations like Barry's and other organizations that actually help mediate the needs that are on the ground and translating them in a way that government can put it into the systems and policies and frameworks that they work under. Oftentimes it works, sometimes it doesn't.
So there's a comment here saying, Salam, Western Cape has a big housing issue and informal settlements is springing up by the day. And to top it off, there is a massive waiting list that stretch back more than 40 years. So how do you work out who to see first? Upgrading at where people live is the way to go. Your thoughts?
I've seen and heard of stories where there have been communities that have been there for decades and not seen to, but a community that's been there for 3 years but just shouts a bit louder gets the nod. So there's not this clear directive in terms of how do we deal with, and as Adi said, some communities are emerging in land that cannot be developed. Floodplains and chemical issues on the land and things like that. You simply cannot develop it. So it's literally not straightforward. The UISP that happened in Sweet Home Farm largely happened because the community got fed up with two things. One, lack of basic services, but also it was an opportunity at the time to usurp the current leader of the community because he was actually Sanko connected and was a little bit corrupt and actually caused harm. And it was an opportunity for the community to say, no, we want difference within our own community, but also we want to see services happen. So you go to the streets, and it was highly disruptive. But the next day they were sitting in front of Patricia DeLille, and they were able to be told that actually we've been waiting for the purchasing of a particular pocket of land, and then within that it means that we now own the whole of that community, which now means that we can develop it. We can bring in some electricity and services and things like that. So at the time you weren't permitted to bring in services if the city didn't own the land.
There's another question here. A question to Difino Kwazi. Would you, as an organization, encourage anyone on the housing waiting list to illegally occupy land and set up an informal settlement in order to get a home quicker from the city?
Absolutely not. I don't think an occupation is a channel to get anybody a home quicker. I think people underestimate the amount of effort people go into occupying a land and how much risk they take on their life and limb to actually occupy a piece of land. So obviously there are like very, very genuine needs of people when some of these occupations happen, and we've encountered hundreds of people that come to a housing clinic, for instance, who say like, look, I'm really desperate, I'm going to be on the street, where do I go? What is the option? And in many instances there isn't an option, and most people end up living in informal settlements or backyards for that instance. I think the question that Barry was responding to earlier around the waiting list and like what that, I think we have to be very clear that the waiting list is not the answer to the housing crisis. It will never be. Waiting list is just a procedure. It's like standing in a queue at Home Affairs from 4 o'clock in the morning. It does not give you your ID. It does not resolve your Home Affairs issue. It just means you're standing in queue and you have a number. It does not mean that that issue gets resolved. So actually where the focus of this conversation and generally the debate around informal settlement, upgrading and any of the kind of housing debates has to focus on is what is it that we want to see at the end of the day. We cannot be talking about like how we get there. First we need to know what we want to see as a city, what that picture looks like before we actually decide what the procedures are.
Well, ways that the Upgrading Informal Settlement Project can be improved to help communities, and that would involve communities. Gentlemen, thank you so much for speaking to us this evening. That was Adi Kumar, the director of at Difuno Kwazi, and Barry Lewis, founder of Ubuhle Baka Buhle, speaking to us about Upgrading Informal Settlements Project, and if this can manifest in the future if we are robust about it. But up next is Reflections with Ayub Ali, looking at finances, and he will be speaking to Imran Hussein of Debt Care, so stay tuned for that. I'm Farida Rabia and Soki and Zinti. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.